She walked into a dusty Brooklyn woodshop with a blank check and the unshakable belief that everything in this world had a price. She was wrong. Evelyn Vance built a billion-dollar empire by acquiring things, companies, properties, power. But when her 7-year-old daughter stopped speaking entirely after watching her father die, no amount of money could buy back the sound of her voice. Then a carpenter named Sam refused her check, handed her a broom, and changed everything. This is a story about what happens when the most powerful woman in the room finally meets something she cannot control. If this story moves you, like and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this reaches. The morning Evelyn Vance decided to take matters into her own hands, the temperature in Manhattan was 9 degrees Fahrenheit, and every boardroom from Midtown to Wall Street was already bracing for her arrival. She was that kind of woman. At 41, Evelyn ran Ethelgard Capital with the precision of a military general and the appetite of someone who had grown up knowing exactly what it felt like to have nothing. She stood 5'8" in heels she never removed, wore her dark hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to communicate something about discipline, and had not taken a vacation day in 4 years. Her staff did not gossip about her personal life because her personal life did not appear to exist. What they gossiped about instead was her competence, which was both terrifying and absolute. She had a daughter. Everyone knew this in the abstract way that people know things about powerful women the way the fact floats at the edge of awareness without ever quite becoming real. Maya, 7 years old, quiet. And then 14 months ago, after the accident that took Daniel Vance from a Tuesday morning highway in New Jersey, completely silent. Not quiet, silent. The distinction was not academic. Maya had not spoken a single word since the paramedics had found her buckled into the back seat of a car her father would never drive again. The therapist used phrases like selective mutism, rooted in acute traumatic grief. Evelyn used no phrases at all. She simply paid for the best care that money could find and continued building the empire that Daniel had believed in before she had even believed in herself. This was what she told herself in the dark hours before dawn, when the silence in the penthouse felt like a presence instead of an absence. This was also a lie, though she was not yet ready to know that. The Harrington Therapeutic Center occupied a brownstone on West 83rd Street, with good light and better credentials. Evelyn had researched it the way she researched acquisitions systematically, relentlessly, cross-referencing outcome studies with parent testimonials with the clinical publications of every therapist on staff. Dr. Patricia Harrington herself had published 3 peer-reviewed papers on childhood grief response and nonverbal therapeutic modalities. Evelyn had read all 3. She brought Maya on a Thursday afternoon in late October, holding her daughter's hand through the lobby with the practiced composure of someone who had learned to treat every environment as a negotiation. The session room was warm and deliberately unstructured. Low shelves held baskets of materials, clay, yarn, watercolors, small instruments, and in the far corner on a square of canvas drop cloth sat a wooden house. It was not a dollhouse in any conventional sense. There were no pink shutters or plastic furniture inside. It was a craftsman's object 2 feet tall and made of pale birchwood with jointed walls that could be reconfigured into different floor plans, removable staircases, hinged roof panels that opened to reveal a second level with its own sliding partitions. It was complex and beautiful and deliberately tactile, the kind of thing built not for display, but for hands that needed to understand how spaces connected. Maya had been sitting frozen in the middle of the room for 11 minutes, which was her average. Then she saw the house. She crossed the room without being asked. She sat down in front of it and reached out and touched the door hinge. And then slowly, with a focus that made every adult in the room hold their breath, as though sound itself might shatter the moment she began to explore it. She opened the roof. She rearranged a wall. She placed a small spool of thread from a nearby basket inside one of the rooms with the particular care of someone furnishing a space that mattered. Dr. Harrington stood in the doorway and watched without intervening. Evelyn stood behind her daughter and felt something she had not felt in 14 months. She felt hope. It arrived without warning and with a force that nearly undid her composure entirely. That evening, after she had taken Maya home and put her to bed, and sat at the edge of her daughter's mattress in the dark, listening to the small, even sounds of her breathing, Evelyn Vance went back to her home office. She did not pour a drink. She opened her laptop and she found him. The house had a maker's mark on its base, a small, branded stamp, S. Callaway Woodworks, Brooklyn. She had noticed it the way she noticed everything instinctively, automatically, without deciding to. It took her assistant 40 minutes to locate a Sam Callaway with a registered workshop on Atlantic Avenue in Park Slope. Tax records business license, a modest website with a portfolio of custom furniture, and what appeared to be a secondary line of children's therapeutic toys developed in partnership with 2 occupational therapists in the area. The website was clean and simple and had last been updated 14 months ago. She read everything twice. Then she called Marcus Chen, her COO, at 11 o'clock at night without apologizing for the hour. I need the full acquisition playbook on a small craftsman operation in Brooklyn. 1 employee, possibly 2. Therapeutic toy line with documented clinical applications. I want exclusivity, comprehensive. Marcus was quiet for 1 beat. What kind of budget are we looking at? Unlimited, Evelyn said. Get me a meeting. Marcus was quiet for another beat, slightly longer. Evelyn, is this for Maya? Good night, Marcus, she said and ended the call. She drove herself to Brooklyn the following Tuesday, which was itself unusual enough to note. Evelyn owned a car service and a driver named Gerald who had been taking her to appointments for 6 years. She did not drive herself places. She arrived in places. But this she did not want witnessed by an employee for reasons she did not examine too carefully. The workshop was exactly what the address suggested. A converted ground-floor commercial space on a block of Atlantic Avenue that had not yet been polished by the particular brand of money currently moving through the adjacent neighborhoods. The signage was hand-lettered on the window. The door had a bell above it on a spring. Inside through the glass, she could see the amber shapes of unfinished furniture and the specific disorder of a working space where the work actually happened. She pushed the door open. The smell hit her first. Cedar and linseed oil, and something warmer underneath wood shavings, maybe. Or the specific warmth of a space where someone spent their actual life. It was the opposite of her office, which smelled of climate control and ambition. A man looked up from the far end of a workbench. He was perhaps 43 or 44, with sawdust in his hair and the kind of forearms that come from years of physical work rather than a gym. He wore a flannel shirt with the sleeves pushed up and safety glasses pushed back on his head like a second set of eyes he had forgotten to remove. There was a smear of wood stain along his left jaw that he appeared entirely unaware of. He looked at her suit, then at her face, then at her suit again. "We're not open for retail," he said. His voice was steady and unhurried, the voice of someone who had decided a long time ago not to be rushed by other people's energy. "I do custom commissions. Wait list is about 7 months currently." "I know," Evelyn said. She crossed the shop floor without hesitation, which she could tell surprised him, and placed the envelope on his workbench. He looked at the envelope without touching it. "What's that?" "A contract summary and a very generous first offer," she said. "My name is Evelyn Vance. I represent Ethelgard Capital. I want to discuss an exclusive partnership arrangement for your therapeutic toy line. Production, distribution, clinical licensing. The details are in the envelope, but the short version is that you would never need to worry about rent again." Sam Callaway looked at the envelope for another moment. Then he looked at her. "You drove here from Manhattan on a Tuesday morning to give me an envelope," he said. "I did. You could have emailed. I find that significant proposals benefit from personal delivery." He picked up the envelope. She watched him open it with the same unhurried hands that built things. He scanned the first page. He turned to the second. He closed it. "No," he said. Evelyn had not heard that word in a professional context in a very long time. It arrived with an almost physical strangeness, like a sound from an instrument she had forgotten existed. "You haven't reviewed the financials," she said. "I reviewed enough." "Mr. Callaway," she kept her voice level with the ease of long practice. "This offer represents a life-changing amount of capital for a single craftsman operation. I can have attorneys draft any modification you require. The exclusivity terms are negotiable. The compensation structure is not a starting point, it is a floor." I understand what it is, Sam said. He set the envelope back on the workbench between them and looked at her with the kind of directness that does not come from aggression, but from clarity. A child's healing isn't a commodity you can acquire, Ms. Vance. The sentence landed like a hand on her sternum. Her composure held. It always held. But something behind it shifted slightly and without permission. I'm not trying to commodify anything, she said carefully. I'm trying to replicate something that worked. What worked was a relationship, Sam said, between a kid and an object and a specific set of materials. You scale that and manufacture it and route it through a distribution chain and you've got a product. You don't have the same thing. What if I could make it available to more children? What if you stopped trying to acquire things that don't work that way? There was a pause. From somewhere behind the workshop partition, she heard a small sound, a child's sound, a brief unconscious humming that stopped as soon as it began. And then a small face appeared around the partition. Maya. Evelyn had not realized she'd been followed in. She turned and her daughter was standing at the edge of the workshop floor 3 feet behind her right hip, looking at the room with wide and careful eyes. She was wearing her green coat with the hood down. She had sawdust on her shoe from somewhere near the door. She was looking at the workbench against the far wall. Not at Sam, not at Evelyn. At the half-finished piece on the workbench, a small jointed chest with the same construction language as the house she had touched at the therapy center. The same pale wood, the same visible hinge, worked the same invitation of tactile complexity. Her small face was open in a way that Evelyn saw so rarely, now that it physically hurt to witness it. Sam looked at Maya. Then he looked at Evelyn. Something in his expression recalibrated. He crouched down to Maya's level, which brought him down to roughly her height, and he said in a completely ordinary voice, "You want to see what that's going to be when it's done?" Maya looked at him for a long moment. Then she walked across the shop floor and stood next to him and looked at the chest. He didn't speak again immediately. He simply picked up a piece of sanding paper folded at once to fit small hands and held it out to her. A question without words. Maya took it. She began to sand the side panel with the careful, focused attention Evelyn had seen at the therapy center, the same quality of presence that had felt to every adult in that room, like watching something rare surface from very deep water. Evelyn stood completely still and watched her daughter's shoulders gradually, incrementally release. Sam stood up and looked at Evelyn. His voice was quiet. "No contracts," he said. "No bodyguards. You bring her here yourself every afternoon you can manage. She works with me when she wants to. She leaves when she's done. That's it." "And what do you get out of that arrangement?" Evelyn said. Sam glanced at his daughter, who had come around the partition fully now, and was watching Maya with the alert curiosity of a child who has recognized a potential friend. "Same thing you do," he said. Evelyn looked at her daughter's hands moving slowly over pale wood. She had walked into the shop with a blank check and the absolute certainty that she was prepared for any negotiation. She had not been prepared for this. "All right," she said. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. She did not correct it. She stood in Sam Calloway's sawdust-floored Brooklyn workshop in her $1,200 suit and watched her silent daughter sand a piece of wood for someone who had refused her money, and she felt the specific and unfamiliar sensation of being entirely, completely, helplessly outmaneuvered by a man who hadn't even been trying. It was, she would think later, the most disorienting moment of her professional life. It was also the beginning of everything. The drive back to Manhattan was longer than it should have been. Evelyn sat in the back of the car she had eventually called Gerald to bring. Watching the BQE unspool through the tinted window and ran through the conversation with the precise analytical attention she applied to every deal that had surprised her. He had said no. He had said no with complete calm and without hostility, which was rarer than actual hostility and harder to work around. He had offered nothing in return. He had not tried to negotiate a better price or different terms. He had simply declined and then done something else entirely, which was to look past her to her daughter. That bothered her. Not in the way being outmaneuvered in business bothered her the quick, sharp irritation of miscalculation. It bothered her in some quieter and less navigable place. She pulled her phone from her bag and opened her calendar. She had a standing commitment Thursday afternoon through her chief of staff. She moved it. She created a new recurring block. 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock p.m. Tuesday, Thursday. Atlantic Avenue Park Slope. Under the description field, she typed Maya. She stared at it for a moment. Then she added, "Bring old shoes." Gerald caught her eye in the rearview mirror with the practiced discretion of a man who had learned to see everything and note nothing. Evelyn looked back out at the bridge. The city spread itself out in every direction, hers in every way that mattered, and in none of the ways that did not. And somewhere behind her in a borough she had never had reason to visit before today. A man with sawdust in his hair had told her that a child's healing was not a commodity she could acquire. And he had been right. And she had known he was right the moment he said it, which was perhaps the most infuriating and necessary thing that had happened to her in a very long time. She did not tell Marcus to stand down on the research. She also did not ask him to continue it. She simply looked out at the city and thought about the way her daughter had walked across a stranger's workshop floor with the quiet courage of someone following something that mattered more than fear. She was her mother's daughter in more ways than Evelyn had perhaps accounted for. The car crossed the bridge. Manhattan rose to meet her. She went back to work. Gerald drove her to Brooklyn the first Tuesday without being asked twice. He had been her driver long enough to understand that when Evelyn Vance added a recurring block to her calendar and labeled it with a single word, the word was not a suggestion. He pulled up to 91 Atlantic Avenue at 2:58 and did not comment on the neighborhood or the hand-lettered window or the fact that his employer was carrying a 7-year-old girl on her hip and wearing, for the first time in 6 years of employment, flat shoes. Evelyn had not planned the flat shoes. She had simply looked at her closet that morning and made a calculation about sawdust and decided that some battles were not worth selecting. Maya had been ready before her. This was new. For 14 months, getting Maya dressed and out of the penthouse had been a negotiation conducted in silence on both sides. Evelyn moving through the routine with the systematic efficiency of someone managing a complex logistics problem. Maya cooperating with the passive compliance of a child who had stopped caring very much about the direction of movement. But that Tuesday morning, Maya had come out of her room already in her green coat hood up, and she had stood by the elevator with her small hands in her pockets and looked at Evelyn with an expression that was the closest thing to impatience her face had produced in over a year. She wanted to go back. Evelyn had looked at her daughter standing by the elevator and felt the specific sensation of hope arriving again without permission. The same feeling that had nearly undone her composure in the therapy center, and she had put on her coat and pressed the button and said nothing because there was nothing adequate to say. The workshop bell rang when they pushed through the door. Sam looked up from his bench. He did not make a production of their arrival. He said, "Hey," in the direction of both of them, the same tone he might use for a regular customer or a neighbor, which Evelyn understood was deliberate and which she appreciated more than a warmer greeting would have allowed her to show. Maya had already moved past her toward the east wall where the half-finished chess sat on the low bench, and Sam watched her settle onto the stool he had placed there, as though it had always been there, which it had not, Evelyn noted, been there the week before. A boy appeared from behind the partition. He was roughly Maya's age, perhaps a year older, with Sam's same steady quality about him. The particular ease of a child who has been raised in a space where real work happens and has absorbed its rhythms without being told to. He had a smear of something blue on his chin and was holding a piece of sandpaper with the serious authority of someone in the middle of a project. "This is Leo," Sam said without looking up from his bench. Leo looked at Maya. Maya looked at Leo. Leo looked at the chest Maya was examining and said with the directness of a child who has not yet learned to perform interest, "That's going to have a secret compartment in the bottom. Dad hasn't shown me how to make the latch yet." Maya looked at the chest. Then she looked at Leo. Then she looked back at the chest with an expression that was the clearest thing Evelyn had seen on her daughter's face in 14 months. She was interested. She was genuinely, completely interested, and the interest was pulling her forward in her seat. The way interest does when it is real, when it has nothing to do with performance or obligation and everything to do with the specific gravity of a thing that matters. Evelyn stood near the door and watched her daughter lean toward a boy she had never met to look at a box with a secret latch, and she thought, with a clarity that did not require analysis, that Sam Calloway had understood something about her daughter in one Tuesday afternoon that 14 months of the best clinical care money could find had been working toward. She took out her phone and called Marcus. This was, she would understand later, the first mistake. Not the call itself, which was professionally necessary, but the place she made it standing in the middle of a woodshop, while a craftsman worked 6 feet away and her daughter was beginning to surface from the deepest water she had ever been under. The call lasted 40 minutes. It involved the Pacific Northwest acquisition, a secondary dispute about a European fund reallocation, and a conference call Marcus needed her on at 4:30. She took the 4:30 call standing near the heating unit phone to her ear, pacing a 12-foot line between the supply shelf and the standing cabinet. Her voice dropping to the specific register she used in high-stakes negotiations, clipped and precise, and carrying the particular energy of someone managing a situation that required her full attention. At some point during the 4:30 call, she registered peripherally that Sam had stopped working. She did not look up. When she ended the call at 5:15 and turned around, Sam was looking at her with an expression that was not hostile and not warm and was simply plainly direct. "You left mud on the floor," he said. She looked down. She had tracked in a thin line of mud from the door during her pacing, the flat shoes having apparently not resolved all weather-related workshop hazards. She looked at him. He crossed to the supply shelf and took a broom from its hook and held it out to her. She looked at the broom. In her professional life, no one handed Evelyn Vance a broom. In her professional life, Evelyn Vance's path was cleared by other people so that mud was not a variable she was required to manage. She understood this, and she understood that Sam understood none of it, or more precisely, that Sam understood all of it and had decided it was not relevant information in his shop. She took the broom, she swept the mud. She was aware as she swept that Leo had looked up from his work and was watching her with the frank curiosity of a child observing an adult doing something unexpected. She was aware that Sam had gone back to his bench without ceremony. She was aware that Maya from her stool at the east wall had also looked over, and that what was on her daughter's face was something between surprise and a very nascent, very careful thing that might, given enough time and enough ordinary Tuesday afternoons, become amusement. Evelyn swept the floor and said nothing, and put the broom back on its hook and returned to her position near the heating unit with her phone in her hand. She did not make another call that afternoon. By the third visit, she had established a functional base of operations at the small folding table near the heating unit that had appeared without discussion on her second visit. She had not asked about the table. Sam had not mentioned it. It was simply there the same way the stool had been there for Maya, the way Sam apparently resolved logistical problems by solving them without announcement. She brought her laptop. She brought her phone. She brought a leather portfolio and a thermos of coffee from the car, because she had arrived on the second visit to find that the pour-over setup on the windowsill produced a quantity of coffee calibrated to Sam's own consumption and not to the additional requirements of a CEO managing $11 billion of assets from a folding table in Brooklyn. Sam had looked at the thermos and said nothing, which she was learning was his version of acknowledgement. The work of Ethelgard Capital did not pause because its chief executive had rearranged her schedule to accommodate a woodshop in Park Slope. The board calls happened. The acquisition calls happened. The quarterly review preparation happened. Evelyn managed it from the folding table with the adaptation of someone who has survived enough different environments to understand that competence is portable, even when its setting is not. What she had not fully accounted for was the effect of the setting itself. The workshop operated on rhythms that were the complete structural opposite of everything she had built her professional life inside. There were no alerts. There were no metrics refreshing on a secondary screen. There was no ambient urgency, no performative busyness, no one managing upward or positioning for the next conversation. There was the sound of tools and wood and the specific patience of work that required you to be present, because the material would tell you immediately if you were not. She found it unexpectedly difficult, not unpleasant. Difficult in the way that stillness is difficult for people who have built a sophisticated internal relationship with motion, who have confused velocity with progress for long enough that slowing down feels like falling. On her third visit, she caught herself refreshing her email during a period of genuine silence, and became aware in the specific way of someone observing their own behavior from a slight distance that she was doing it not because there was anything requiring response, but because the silence was making her aware of the inside of her own head, which had not been a space she had visited with any regularity in several years. She put her phone face down on the folding table. She looked at the workshop. Maya was sanding. Leo was beside her, showing her something about the angle of the paper against the grain, demonstrating with the patient authority of a child who has been doing this long enough to have opinions about technique. Maya was watching him with her full attention, the quality of attention that Evelyn had seen at the therapy center, and again on that first Tuesday. The attention that meant something real was happening in the interior spaces that had been closed for 14 months. Sam was at his bench with his back to all of them, working on something that involved a small, precise chisel and a level of focus that had its own kind of quietness. Evelyn sat at her folding table with her phone face down and looked at her daughter and breathed and did not pick up the phone for 47 minutes, which was the longest she had gone without checking it during waking hours, in a period she could not accurately calculate. It felt, she thought, like learning to be somewhere. She had forgotten that being somewhere was a skill. The conference call that changed things happened on a Wednesday of the second week, though Evelyn was not usually in the workshop on Wednesdays. She had come because a morning meeting in Midtown had canceled and the afternoon was unexpectedly open, and she had found herself without making a decision. She was entirely conscious of driving to Brooklyn. She had brought Maya, who had not been expecting it, and who had expressed this by coming down the elevator faster than usual and waiting by the car with the hood of her green coat already up. The call was with the Pacific Northwest board of a company Ethelgard was in the process of acquiring a call that had been rescheduled 3 times and that could not be moved again. It was scheduled for 2 o'clock and ran to a situation that required Evelyn's full engagement. The target company's chairman had arrived at the call, prepared to renegotiate terms that had been agreed upon in writing 6 weeks prior, which was the kind of corporate bad faith that Evelyn handled with a specific cold precision that her team privately called the temperature drop. The temperature drop involved her voice getting quieter and her language getting more exact, and the overall impression of someone who had already calculated 3 moves ahead and was politely allowing you to catch up. She was in the middle of it, pacing her 12-foot line near the heating unit, voice low and controlled, when she heard the sound. It came from the east corner behind the low workbench where Maya worked. A sound Evelyn recognized from the base of her nervous system below. Thought, below professional training, the compressed, pressurized sound of her daughter's panic arriving. She turned. Maya was on the floor behind the workbench, back against the wall, her green coat still on, and her hands pressing flat against the plaster on either side of her, as though the wall was the only fixed point in a room that had stopped having a floor. Her eyes were squeezed shut. The sound she was making was not a cry. It was something more internal and more frightening than a cry, the sound of a system under overload with nowhere to send it. Evelyn looked at her daughter. She was aware in some distant professional part of herself that the Pacific Northwest chairman was still talking. "I'll call you back," she said. She ended the call. She did not think about the acquisition. She did not think about the renegotiation. She did not think about the 3 moves she had already calculated ahead of a chairman who had arrived in bad faith to a call he had agreed to in writing. All of that existed on the other side of a door that closed completely and without effort the moment she looked at her daughter on the floor. She crossed the workshop. She did not say Maya's name. Dr. Harrington had walked her through this enough times that the instruction was below the level of decision. Now it was simply what her body knew. You do not call into the storm. You move close, and you become the stable thing. She sat down on the floor. The cold of the concrete came through her trousers immediately. She put her back against the wall beside Maya, and she held out her hand palm up on her own knee. Not reaching, not asking, simply making it available, a choice that required nothing, a hand that would be there whether or not it was taken. 11 seconds. She counted them not consciously, but in the way your body counts things when you are waiting for something that matters more than anything else currently happening in the world. Then Maya's hands came off the wall and grabbed hers. The bite was immediate and involuntary, and it broke the skin. Evelyn felt it arrive with the specific clarity of pain that is real and significant, and she did not make a sound. She did not move. She did not pull back or tighten or do anything that would send the wrong signal into her daughter's overwhelmed nervous system. She sat against the wall and absorbed it, the way the wall absorbed it, without response, without reaction, simply present. And she hummed. The song came from somewhere she had not opened in 14 months. It was Daniel's song, a folk melody he had known from his own childhood, and sung to Maya when she was an infant, and later when she was tired or sick or simply in need of the specific comfort of a familiar sound. Evelyn had not sung it since the Tuesday in November, when the paramedics had found them by the side of a New Jersey highway, and the world had reorganized itself into a before and an after with a hard, bright line between them. She hummed it now. Low, steady, no words, just the shape of the melody moving through the cold workshop air, like something that had been waiting in the walls of her chest for the right moment to be let out. Maya's grip did not loosen, but the bite pressure changed. Fractionally, then more. Like a tide that has reached its peak and decided quietly without announcement to begin its return. Her breathing changed. The high compressed sound softened. Then it stopped. Then there was only breathing, ragged at first, and then slower, following the melody the way breathing will follow a steady sound when the body is ready to be led back to safety. 4 minutes and 30 seconds after Evelyn sat down on the floor, Maya let go of her hand. She turned into Evelyn's side and pressed her face against her coat and went entirely still with the loose, boneless collapse of a child who has used every resource she had and returned from the far edge of something. Evelyn wrapped her free arm around her daughter's shoulders and held her and did not move and did not hum anymore because the song had done what it came to do, and now only the holding was needed. She looked at her hand. The blood was minimal, but the mark was real. She noted this the way you note a thing that requires later attention and categorized it as later. She became aware after some time of a sound from across the workshop. The specific quiet sound of Sam setting something down on the workbench with care. Then footsteps, deliberate and unhurried, moving to the supply shelf. Then the soft sounds of a cabinet being opened and specific items being selected and placed on a surface. She did not look up. She sat on the floor and held her daughter and heard from the direction of her folding table the careful placement of objects she could not yet see. When Maya had moved through the collapse into the loose, exhausted sleep of a child who has nothing left to spend, Evelyn stood. She moved slowly, supporting Maya's weight, and settled her daughter against the folded workshop blanket that had appeared at some point during the past 30 minutes on the floor beside them. She did not know when Sam had put it there. She stood and turned to her folding table. A first aid kit sat open beside her laptop. Beside the first aid kit was a cup of tea. She picked up the cup. It was still hot. Sam was at his workbench with his back to her, working on something that involved the small, precise chisel and the same quality of focus as always, as though nothing had happened, or as though everything had happened, and he had decided the most useful response was to be exactly and only what he always was. She opened the first aid kit. She cleaned the wound on her hand with the methodical attention of someone performing a necessary task. She did not say thank you. He had not looked at her or made anything of what she was doing. The tea and the first aid kit were not gestures waiting for acknowledgement. They were simply the practical response of a man who had seen what she was made of and had decided quietly, without announcement, to take care of the things that needed taking care of. She wrapped her hand. She picked up her tea. She sat at her folding table and looked at her closed laptop. And outside the workshop window, the October afternoon was doing what October afternoons do, making the light gold and slightly melancholy and very clear. And she thought about a chairman in the Pacific Northwest who was probably leaving her a message right now about renegotiated terms. And she thought about the acquisition and the board and the quarterly review, and all of it existed at a very specific and manageable distance. She did not open her laptop. She drank her tea. Behind her against the wall with the workshop blanket, Maya slept. Across the room, Sam worked. The afternoon moved through the windows at its gold October angle, and the only sounds were the sounds of tools and wood and the specific kind of quiet that exists in rooms where people have decided, without discussing it, to take care of each other. Leo came home from school that day at 3:15, set his backpack on his chair, and registered the situation with the acute social intelligence of a child who has learned to read the weather of a room before deciding how to enter it. He looked at Maya asleep against the wall. He looked at Evelyn at the folding table with her bandaged hand around a cup of tea. He looked at his father. Sam said very quietly, "Good day." Leo considered. "Medium," he said, which was his honest assessment Evelyn was learning rather than a performance of either optimism or complaint. He got his almonds from the third shelf, navigating around Evelyn's bag, with the careful respect of a child who has been taught that other people's things are other people's things, and he went to his homework corner and opened his backpack and began without being asked to work. Evelyn watched him for a moment. She thought about what it meant to raise a child who came home and said, "medium," when asked about his day, who did not perform contentment and did not perform distress, who simply reported the honest condition of things and then got on with what was required. She thought about what kind of parent produced that child, and what kind of daily choices made in a woodshop on Atlantic Avenue over the accumulated weight of ordinary afternoons resulted in a boy who could read a room and respond to it with both care and equanimity. She looked at Sam's back, the set of his shoulders over the workbench, the unhurried movement of his hands over the piece he was shaping. She thought about the tea, still hot. She looked at her laptop and the missed call notification from the Pacific Northwest chairman and the 47-message backlog that had accumulated during the 4:30 call she had ended in 8 words. She opened her laptop. She called the Pacific Northwest chairman back at 4:40 and conducted the remainder of the negotiation with the temperature drop fully operational and the terms returned to their agreed position within 22 minutes, because Evelyn Vance was professionally formidable in ways that did not require her to be in a specific building or wearing specific shoes, and that had not been in any way diminished by sitting on a concrete floor for half an hour. What had been changed, though she would not have been able to articulate this precisely on that particular October afternoon, was something in the architecture of her attention. The capability was the same, but something behind it was different. Something was taking up space in the interior room she had been sending her full attention elsewhere to avoid, and it was not grief exactly, or not only grief. It was also something else, something that felt cautiously and without her permission, like the beginning of being known. She finished the call. She looked across the workshop at a man who had handed her a broom on her second visit and left her a cup of tea on her 6th, and had not made either gesture into more than what it was. She looked at her daughter still sleeping against the folded blanket, her green coat rising and falling with the even breath of a child in true rest. She looked at Leo in his homework corner pencil moving steadily across a page, almonds in a small pile beside his notebook, entirely at home in himself. She closed her laptop. She was somewhere. She was actually specifically, undeniably somewhere, and the somewhere was asking something of her that no boardroom had ever asked, not her strategy or her leverage or her precision, but her presence. Her simple, unmanaged, unoptimized presence. She was not yet certain she knew how to give it. She was beginning to understand that she was going to have to learn. Outside on Atlantic Avenue, the October light had reached the long gold angle of late afternoon, and the hand-lettered window caught it the way old glass catches light, holding it briefly before letting it go. And inside the workshop, the second cup of coffee was ready on the windowsill, pour-over, because it was 2 o'clock somewhere in the rhythm of a day that operated by different rules than the ones Evelyn Vance had spent 20 years building her life inside. Sam looked over his shoulder. "Coffee," he said. It was not an offer. It was information the same way the flannel on the hook was information the same way the folding table had been information. Available, undemanding. There. Evelyn stood up and poured herself a cup, and it was, she noted with the precision she brought to things that surprised her, exactly as good as the thermos she had brought from Manhattan. She did not say this out loud, but she left the thermos in the car the following Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that, and every Tuesday, and Thursday after that, and Sam never mentioned it, and neither did she, and the pour-over on the windowsill was always ready at 2 o'clock, which was the time she arrived, and neither of them examined this coincidence, because some things are understood more cleanly when they are not discussed. The first week of November arrived in Brooklyn with the particular cruelty of a season that had not yet decided what it wanted to be. The mornings were cold enough to see your breath. The afternoons still carried a reluctant warmth that made the cold feel dishonest. The ginkgo trees on Atlantic Avenue dropped their leaves in sudden yellow sheets, as though startled into letting go. Evelyn had been coming to the workshop for 3 weeks. She had stopped leaving her heels on in the car after the second visit when Sam had handed her a pair of old rubber-soled work boots without comment, and she had put them on without arguing because the alternative was slipping on sawdust again, and she had already done that once. The boots were 2 sizes too large. She wore them with her wool trousers tucked in, and she looked, she knew, completely ridiculous. She had also stopped caring about this somewhere around visit 5, which was itself a data point she filed away without examining too carefully. The rhythms of the shop had become familiar in the way that foreign geography becomes familiar before you realize you have memorized it. Sam arrived before 7 and opened the street-facing windows for 20 minutes regardless of temperature because he said the wood needed air the same way people did. Leo caught the school bus at 7:40 from the corner and came back to the shop at 3:15, dropping his backpack on the same chair every afternoon with the comfortable authority of a child who knew his home was reliable. Sam made coffee twice a day, once at opening and once at 2 o'clock in a pour-over setup on the windowsill that he executed with the same focused patience he gave to everything else. Evelyn had started arriving at 2:30, so the coffee was ready. She had not mentioned this calculation to anyone. Maya came every Tuesday and Thursday, which Evelyn had negotiated down from every day only because her own schedule made every day logistically impossible, and not because she would not have brought her daughter daily if she could. On those afternoons, Maya sat beside Sam at the low workbench he had built against the east wall. Specifically, he said, because the afternoon light came through the east window at a useful angle for fine work. He had not mentioned that he built it after Maya's third visit. Evelyn had noticed the new construction and not commented on it either. They were she and Sam conducting a careful parallel operation of noticing things about each other without acknowledging the noticing. She understood this intellectually. She chose not to think about what it meant. What she did think about on the evenings she allowed herself the luxury of unstructured thought was Maya. Maya was not healed. Healing was not a binary event, and Evelyn had been educated thoroughly enough by Dr. Harrington to understand the difference between progress and recovery. But there was something different in her daughter now, something in the architecture of how she held herself. She still did not speak. But she had begun to make sounds again, not words, but the unconscious ambient sounds of a child who was not braced against the world. She hummed sometimes while she worked. She laughed once briefly when Leo knocked over a jar of wood screws and scrambled after them on the floor with exaggerated distress, and the laugh came out of her like something that had been held under pressure and found a small crack. It lasted perhaps 2 seconds. It left Evelyn standing at the far wall with her phone held in one hand and her chest doing something she refused to identify as crying. She was not crying. She had not cried in 14 months. She was simply recalibrating. It was on a gray Thursday in mid-November that the panic attack happened. Evelyn had been on a call. This was not unusual. She was almost always on a call, the phone tucked between her ear and her shoulder, while she sat at the small folding table Sam had wordlessly assigned to her in the corner near the heating unit, her laptop open and the workshop noise becoming a kind of background she had learned to filter. She managed $2 billion of active portfolio from that folding table with her silk blouse covered by one of Sam's old flannels, because the workshop ran cold and she had stopped pretending that was not a practical solution. The call was with Lawrence Pitt, her head of acquisitions, and it was not going well. A target company in the Pacific Northwest was resisting preliminary outreach, and the board was pushing for a more aggressive approach. And Evelyn was explaining with the specific controlled edge in her voice that her staff recognized as the last warning before consequences that aggressive approaches created litigation risk that ate margins before the ink on the deal was dry. She did not immediately notice that the sound level in the workshop had changed. Then she heard Sam say quietly and without alarm, "Leo, go get your dad." She turned. Maya was in the corner behind the low workbench between the wall and a stack of unfinished panels, and she was making a sound that Evelyn had heard before, and that hit her nervous system with the impact of a physical alarm. A high compressed sound, not quite a cry, the sound of a child whose body had been overrun by something her mind could not process. Her small hands were pressed flat against the wall on either side of her as though the wall was the only stable surface in a world that had stopped being level. "Lawrence," Evelyn said, "I'll call you back." She ended the call before he responded. She crossed the workshop in 8 steps. She did not say Maya's name. Dr. Harrington had told her months ago that during a panic attack, direct address could escalate. You moved close, and you stayed quiet, and you made yourself a predictable physical presence, something stable in the tilting room. Evelyn sat down on the floor. She sat down on the floor of Sam Calloway's workshop in her tailored trousers and his oversized flannel and her ridiculous borrowed work boots, and she put her back against the wall beside her daughter, and she held out her hand, palm up on her own knee, not demanding contact, simply making it available. Maya's breath was ragged and fast, and her eyes were closed. 11 seconds. Then Maya grabbed her hand with both of hers and bit down on the back of it. Not gently, with the full involuntary force of a child whose nervous system had nowhere else to send the overload. Evelyn felt the pain arrive sharp and immediate, and she did not make a sound. She did not move. She did not pull her hand back. She sat against the wall with her daughter's teeth breaking the skin on the back of her hand, and she began to hum. It was a song Daniel had sung to Maya when she was small. A folk song that had no particular significance except that he had known it, and she had learned it from listening to him, and she had not hummed it since November of last year because it lived in the same interior space as all the things she had not allowed herself to access. She hummed it now. Low and steady, no words, just the melody moving through the cold workshop air. Maya's grip did not release, but the bite pressure eased, fractionally, then more. Her breathing began to slow. Evelyn kept humming. She felt the blood moving across the back of her hand, and she noted it the way you note weather, as information requiring later attention, and she kept humming. 4 minutes and 30 seconds from the moment Evelyn sat down, Maya's hands opened. She turned into Evelyn's side and pressed her face against the flannel shirt, and went still with the sudden total collapse of a child who has used every resource she had and come out the other side. Evelyn wrapped her free arm around her daughter's shoulders and held her. She did not look up, but she heard from across the workshop the sound of Sam setting something down very quietly on the workbench. And then a few moments later, she heard the small, specific sounds of a first aid kit being opened. When she finally stood 30 minutes later, after Maya had fallen into the loose, exhausted sleep of post-panic calm, Evelyn found a first aid kit and a cup of tea sitting on the folding table next to her laptop. The tea was still hot. Sam was at his own workbench with his back to her working. He did not turn around or ask how she was. She picked up the first aid kit and opened it and began cleaning the wound on her hand with the methodical attention of someone performing a task, and she did not look at him, and neither of them said anything. But something in the room had changed. She felt it the way you feel a pressure shift before weather. Not an event, not a declaration. Simply a change in the quality of the air between two people who have seen something true about each other. 2 days later, it was Leo's turn. He came in from school on a Tuesday with his jaw set in the particular way of a boy who has decided that something does not hurt and is wrong about this. He dropped his backpack on his chair and picked it up again and put it down more carefully than usual, and then stood in the middle of the workshop with his hands in his pockets, looking at nothing. Sam looked at him for a moment. "Bad day." "Fine," Leo said. "Okay," Sam said. He went back to work. Evelyn watched this over her laptop. She had learned by now that Sam's approach to Leo's difficult moods was to make himself available without applying pressure, and that Leo generally came around to talking within about 20 minutes. Today, Leo came around in 4, which meant it was worse than usual. "There's a kid at school, he said from the middle of the shop floor to no one in particular. "He keeps taking my lunch," Sam set down his tool. "Same kid every day?" "Yeah." "You tell the teacher." Leo's face communicated several things at once. "Yeah." "Didn't help." "No." Evelyn closed her laptop. Both of them looked at her. "How old is this kid?" she said. Leo blinked. "He's in 5th grade. "So he's 10-11, bigger than you?" "Yeah." "Does he do it in front of other kids or when you're alone?" Leo thought about this. In front of kids. In the lunch line. Evelyn nodded slowly. She knew a woman who was naturally positioned to give warm emotional support. She had tried the warm emotional support approach with adult colleagues, and it had consistently felt like putting on a coat that did not fit. What she was strategic, and strategy worked on fourth graders as reliably as it worked on boards of directors. He needs an audience, she said. That's his weakness. Leo looked uncertain. Okay. Next time he does, don't react to him. React to the audience. Turn to the other kids in line and say out loud with as much boredom as you can manage, "He does this every day. It stopped being interesting the first time." Then take your tray back and walk away. Leo stared at her. You're not fighting him, Evelyn continued. You're reclassifying him. Right now he gets your fear and everyone else's attention. You're going to make him boring. Nothing is more socially damaging to a fifth-grade bully than being boring. The workshop was quiet. Leo turned this over in his face with the visible concentration of a child running a simulation. Then something shifted in his expression, the particular shift of a person who has just received information that reorganizes a problem they thought was unsolvable. That might actually work, he said. It will work, Evelyn said. The only variable is your delivery. Practice being bored. It is harder than it sounds. Leo looked at his father. Sam was looking at Evelyn with an expression she had not seen on him before. It was not the careful, neutral assessment she had gotten used to, the patient watchfulness of a man who had decided to see what she was made of before drawing conclusions. It was something else, something quieter and more direct. He looked away first back to his workbench. She's right, he said simply. Leo picked up his backpack with considerably more energy than he had set it down. He went to his homework corner. Within 3 minutes, he was working through a math sheet with visible purpose. The jaw no longer set, the problem apparently reclassified from the category of unbearable to the category of solved. Evelyn opened her laptop again. She was aware with a precision she did not examine too carefully that Sam was looking at her again from across the workshop. She typed a sentence that she immediately deleted and typed again. The afternoon light moved through the east window at its useful angle. Nobody said anything for a while, and the silence was entirely different from the silence that had existed in this room 3 weeks ago. The wooden heart appeared on a Wednesday. Evelyn was not usually there on Wednesdays, but she had rearranged 2 meetings and come anyway, telling herself it was because she needed to use the east-facing light for a document review that required concentration, which was not true, but was a sufficient story. Maya had been working on a small piece for several days. Sam had given her a scrap of pale birch roughly the size of her palm and a set of small carving tools with blunted edges designed for children, and he had shown her the basic motion once, and then left her to it entirely. He did not direct her work. He never directed her work. He was simply present in the way that the workbench was present, reliable and available, and not requiring anything from her. Evelyn had watched the piece evolve over several visits without being able to determine what Maya was making, because Maya had draped a small cloth over it each time she set it down, a gesture of privacy that Sam had noticed and honored without comment. On that Wednesday, Maya worked for 40 minutes with the concentrated silence that had become in the weeks since October, the specific texture of her focus. Then she stopped. She sat with the piece in her hands for a long moment. Then she turned around on her stool and held it out to Evelyn. Evelyn came over and took it. It was a heart. Rough and uneven, asymmetrical in the way that things made by small hands are asymmetrical, one side rounder than the other, and the top indentation slightly off-center. It was not polished. The carving marks were visible, the evidence of effort and patience, and the particular stubbornness of someone who had decided that a thing was worth finishing. It was the most beautiful object Evelyn had ever held in her hands. She turned it over. She felt the slight roughness of the unfinished wood under her fingers. She did not trust her voice to do anything useful, so she did not use it. Maya was watching her with her dark eyes, the eyes she had gotten from Daniel, that Evelyn could still barely look at, directly some mornings, without the ground shifting under her, and the expression on her daughter's face was something Evelyn had not seen there in over a year. It was hope, offered deliberately with the full awareness of a 7-year-old who understood she was offering something that could be declined. Evelyn sat down on the stool next to Maya and wrapped both hands around the wooden heart and held it the way you hold something irreplaceable. Maya leaned forward, and then in a voice barely above a breath, a voice rusty from long disuse and slightly uncertain of its own right to exist, Maya said one word. Mom. The workshop did not change, The afternoon light kept coming through the east window. Sam's hands kept moving over the piece he was shaping at his bench. The wood shavings on the floor did not rearrange themselves. The world outside on Atlantic Avenue continued its ordinary business of existing. But something in Evelyn Vance broke open. Not broke, she would think later. Opened. There was a difference. A break is damage. This was the specific sensation of a room too long sealed, finally letting in air. She made no sound. She put her arms around her daughter and held her and pressed her lips against Maya's hair and breathed. Just breathed the small cedar and child smell of her daughter's head, and behind her, she heard Sam quietly set down his tools and walk out the back door of the workshop, giving them the room with the same wordless consideration he applied to everything. He was gone for 10 minutes. When he came back in, Maya had fallen asleep against Evelyn's shoulder, the wooden heart still in her mother's hand. Sam looked at them. He looked at Evelyn's face. He went to the supply shelf and came back with a piece of fine sandpaper and sat down on the opposite stool and began very quietly to smooth the rough edges of the wooden heart while it was still in Evelyn's hand, working around her fingers with the patient attention of someone who understood how to be careful with things that mattered. Neither of them spoke. The afternoon moved through the window in long gold angles. Outside, the ginkgo trees had finished letting go of their leaves entirely, and the branches were bare and clean against the November sky, the way things look after they have stopped holding on to what no longer serves them. The flannel shirt thing had started so gradually that Evelyn could not have identified the specific day it became inevitable. She had worn it the first time because the workshop ran cold, and it was there on the hook by the back door, and Sam had said on her third visit without looking up from his work, "There's a flannel on the hook if you're cold," in the same tone he used to say, "Coffee's ready," which was to say the tone of someone making practical information available without attaching significance to it. She had put it on over her silk blouse, and it had hung to mid-thigh and smelled of cedar and linseed oil, and something else, something warm and human, and she had sat at her folding table in it for 3 hours without thinking about how she looked. By November, she was bringing the flannel off the hook herself before Sam had to mention it. By the second week of November, she had learned which drawer held the rags for staining, and she had started helping prep the smaller pieces without being asked, because she had been watching Sam do it for enough weeks that she understood the process and her hands were not useful when they were idle. Sam had noticed this and said nothing, which she had come to understand was his form of acceptance. What she noticed in return was that her laptop hinge had stopped sticking somewhere around week 4 without her having taken it to anyone. That a bowl of actual food reliably appeared on her table at noon because Sam had worked out through simple observation that she ate nothing but black coffee until evening, if left to herself, and he had decided apparently without discussion that this was a problem he was going to solve. That when she drove up on Tuesdays and Thursdays, the back door was unlatched because he had worked out her arrival time and chosen to make the entry easy. She assembled these facts carefully and did not draw conclusions from them. She was drawing conclusions from them. The late nights began in the third week of November. Sam had taken on a complex commission, a custom kitchen installation that required precision joinery work he preferred to do after business hours when the shop was quiet. Evelyn began staying past 6 on the evenings. This happened ostensibly finishing work of her own, actually. If she was honest, unwilling to leave the specific quality of the room when it was just the two of them and the focused sound of good work being done. They talked during those evenings in a way they did not talk during the day. Not about important things initially. About Leo's reading list and the kitchen commission's dovetail problem and the particular irritations of a building permit application in Kings County. But the talking was easy in the way that talking becomes easy when you have been in the same room with someone for enough hours that the performance of interaction has worn away. One evening in late November, close to 10 o'clock, she looked up from the quarterly projections she had been reviewing and said without deciding to, "Daniel used to say that I only knew how to love things from a safe distance, that I kept a 10-foot gap between myself and anything that could hurt me." Sam did not stop working immediately. He finished the joint he was fitting and set it carefully down, and then he looked up. "Was he right?" he said. "I think he was trying to tell me something for years that I didn't have the vocabulary to hear," she said. "I think he was lonely in the marriage in ways I didn't understand until he wasn't there to be lonely anymore." The workshop held this for a moment. That's a hard thing to know, Sam said. Yes, she said. He picked up a piece of sandpaper and turned it in his hands without using it. Rebecca left because I wouldn't stop, he said. Building, expanding, taking commissions. I couldn't fulfill on time because I kept adding more. I thought I was building security for us. She said she needed a partner, not a plan. He looked at the sandpaper. Leo was 4. Do you think she was wrong? Evelyn said. I think we were both trying to love each other in languages we hadn't bothered to translate, he said. The workshop held that too. It was the most honest conversation Evelyn had had with another adult in 14 months, possibly longer. She understood sitting at her folding table with her quarterly projections open on her screen and his flannel shirt warm around her shoulders that she had not had many conversations like this even before that she had built her professional fluency into something so comprehensive that her personal vocabulary had atrophied from disuse. She thought, learning a new language. She was learning it the way Maya was learning it, by handling the materials and feeling how they fit together and making shapes that were rough and uneven and not polished but true. The night they assembled the playground set was the 3rd week of December. Sam had designed it as a Christmas gift for both children, a structure for the small yard behind the workshop with a climbing frame and a slide and a section that could be configured as either a fort or a stage depending on the children's current preference. It was complex and required 2 full days of assembly. Leo and Maya had been sent to Sam's neighbor for the weekend, a retired school teacher named Mrs. Park, who tolerated children with cheerful efficiency and whose apartment smelled permanently of baking. Sam and Evelyn had the workshop and the yard to themselves. They worked from 9 in the morning until nearly midnight the second night. Evelyn's hands were sore from driving bolts, and her back ached from the cold of the yard, and there was a streak of paint along her forearm from the section she had primed because Sam had said the instructions claimed it did not require primer, and she had said all structural outdoor wood required primer, and she had been right. She had not said this out loud when she was proven right, which Sam had noticed, and which she suspected had improved his opinion of her more than the correctness itself. At 11:45, they sat on the half-built platform of the fort section in the cold yard, with the December sky overhead and the finished parts of the playground extending around them. Sam had a thermos of coffee. She had taken her hair out of its clip because it kept catching on the hardware, and her hair was loose around her shoulders for the first time in any space he had seen her in. She smelled of cedar and paint and cold air. She thought, completely exhausted. She was also more comfortable in her own body than she had been in longer than she could accurately remember. Section C is going to take another 2 hours tomorrow, Sam said. Section C is poorly designed, she said. The load distribution diagram in the instructions is wrong. We should redistribute the weight through the vertical supports rather than the horizontal bracing. He looked at her. I have an engineering background, she said, prior to finance. He was quiet for a moment. You keep surprising me, he said. Most people find it irritating. I'm not most people, he said. She looked at him. He was looking back at her, not with the careful assessment she had grown used to in October, and not with the quiet recognition of the past several weeks, with something simpler than either. The cold yard was very still. She leaned forward at the same moment he did, and there was no preamble to it, and no orchestration, only the logical conclusion of weeks of accumulated proximity and honesty, and the specific intimacy of 2 people who have been tired and useful and true in each other's presence, and when they kissed, it tasted like cold air and black coffee and cedar, and it was the least managed thing Evelyn Vance had done in a decade. She pulled back after a moment and looked at him in the December dark. Section C in the morning, she said. Section C in the morning. He agreed. She handed him back the thermos. Overhead, the December sky was enormous and clear. Every star visible. The city reduced to a soft amber peripheral glow around its edges. The yard itself a pocket of stillness inside all that noise. She leaned her shoulder against his, and they sat in the cold and finished the coffee and did not say anything else, and the silence between them was at last, and without any negotiation, entirely warm. January came to Brooklyn the way bad news comes to people who have briefly forgotten to expect it. Without announcement, without apology, simply arriving and making itself at home in the spaces where warmth used to be. Evelyn noticed the cold differently now than she had in October. In October, the workshop had been a foreign territory she was mapping with professional detachment. In January, it was a place she knew the way you know the rooms of your own home, by feel, by sound, by the specific quality of light at different hours. She knew which floorboard near the east window had a soft spot. She knew that the heating unit took 12 minutes to reach full output on mornings below 30 degrees. She knew that Sam made his second cup of coffee when he was stuck on a joinery problem and was trying to think through his hands rather than his head. She knew the sound of his thinking, which was saying a great deal. Maya had spoken 11 words since the wooden heart. Not in sentences, not yet, but individual words offered at specific moments with the precision of someone who had learned to conserve a resource that was only recently restored. She had said the names of 3 of Sam's tools. She had said cold one morning when the heating unit was slow. She had said Leo's name twice, both times, to get his attention, both times successfully. Each word arrived in the workshop like a small stone dropped into still water, the ripple of it moving through every person in the room and being carefully, collectively not made into too large a thing, because they had all understood without discussion that the way to keep the water safe was not to crowd the edges. Leo had solved the bully problem on the 3rd try. He had reported back to Evelyn with the methodical precision of someone delivering a project update, informing her that the first attempt had been undermined by a nervous laugh, at the wrong moment the second by insufficient volume, and the 3rd had landed correctly, and the 5th grade boy had not taken his lunch since. Evelyn had listened to this debrief with the same seriousness she brought to actual project updates and had said, "Good execution." And Leo had looked at her with an expression she was learning to recognize as the one he wore when he was deciding whether to hug her. He had not yet hugged her. She had not yet asked him to. They were both, she thought, people who needed to arrive at things on their own terms, which was possibly why they understood each other. The playground set had been completed on a Sunday morning in mid-December, with Evelyn correctly redistributing the load through the vertical supports of Section C, while Sam acknowledged this engineering adjustment with a single nod that contained she had learned to read the equivalent of an extended speech. The children had found it, Christmas morning Leo, with a shout that woke Mrs. Park through the shared wall, and Maya with a silence that was nothing like her old silence, the wide, bright-eyed silence of someone whose joy is too large for sound. Evelyn had stood in the cold yard watching them, and Sam had stood beside her, and she had felt with a clarity that did not require analysis that she was standing in the right place. She had also been managing a crisis at Ethelgard Capital since the 2nd week of December, which she had not mentioned to Sam because there were categories of her life she had not yet found the language to bridge, and this was one of them. The crisis had a name. It was called the Meridian Project, and it had been in development for 22 months and represented the largest single investment Ethelgard Capital had made in its 11-year history. 43 acres of commercial and mixed-use development in Brooklyn, targeting 3 adjacent neighborhoods in Park Slope Gowanus and Carroll Gardens, anchored by a flagship tower designed by an architect whose name appeared on 3 different magazine covers. The projected returns were significant enough to reverse an 18-month decline in the firm's equity value that had made the board deeply and vocally unhappy. Evelyn had approved the Meridian project before October. She had approved it the way she approved most major acquisitions, with comprehensive diligence and clean confidence, and the forward momentum of a woman who had not yet learned that some coordinates on a map look entirely different from the inside than from the position of someone drawing the lines. The acquisition phase had been proceeding through standard channels for months. Parcels were being identified. Negotiations with property owners were underway through intermediaries, as was standard practice. Evelyn received the progress reports, the way she received all progress reports as data organized, summarized, stripped of the granular human texture that intermediaries were paid to manage. On the 14th of January, her assistant placed the final acquisition summary on her desk at 7:15 in the morning, and Evelyn opened it with her coffee and began to read. She read it twice. Then she sat very still for a long moment. Then she turned to the appendix, which listed the specific properties under acquisition in the Atlantic Avenue corridor. She found it on page 7 of the appendix, 87 through 100, 3 Atlantic Avenue Park Slope. Current use mixed commercial residential above. Structures dated 1887 to 1921. Acquisition status, final approach. Demolition timeline Q2. She read the address 3 times. The 4th time she read it, she was already pulling up the property records on her second screen, cross-referencing the parcel boundaries, confirming what she already knew the moment she saw the number 91. Callaway Woodworks. 91 Atlantic Avenue, the entire block. She sat at her desk on the 31st floor of a midtown building with the January sky gray and flat, outside the floor-to-ceiling windows and the coffee cooling in her hand, and she looked at the address on the page and understood with the absolute clarity of someone who has just seen 2 rooms of their life occupy the same space that she had been walking toward this moment since October without knowing it existed. Her board wanted the block. Her company had already begun acquisition proceedings. The timeline was not theoretical. The demolition was in Q2, which meant April or May, which meant the process was not in its early stages. The process was nearly complete. She closed the acquisition summary. She opened it again. She understood to think with extreme care. Not with the part of herself that had kissed Sam Calloway in a cold December yard. With the part of herself that had built Ethelgard Capital from a leveraged bet on a collapsing bond market into a firm that managed $11 billion of assets. The part that had survived 3 hostile takeover attempts and a regulatory investigation and a board coup in 2019 that she had dismantled before it reached the agenda. She needed to think with that part. She spent 4 hours in her office without answering calls. At noon, she called Marcus. "The Atlantic Avenue corridor acquisition," she said. "What's the current legal status on the residential and mixed-use properties?" She heard Marcus pause in the specific way that meant he was choosing his words. "We're at the final notification stage on most parcels, a few holdouts. The intermediary team is handling the last outreach." Pause all outreach on the Atlantic Avenue parcels. Another pause. Longer. "Evelyn." Pause it, Marcus. "The board has the Q2 demolition timeline locked into the Meridian projections. If we pause acquisition on Atlantic Avenue, we push the entire project. I'm aware of what a pause implies. Can I ask what's driving this?" "Due diligence review," she said. "There are historical preservation questions on the 1880s structures that I want assessed before we proceed. Get me the architectural survey reports on the pre-1900 buildings on the block." She heard Marcus process this. "Evelyn, are you certain this is a due diligence issue?" She knew what he was asking. Marcus had been her COO for 6 years, and he was within the specific language of their professional relationship, the closest thing she had to someone who could read her. "Get me the reports, Marcus," she said. And she ended the call. She did not go to the workshop that afternoon. She told herself this was because she needed the time to review the architectural surveys, which was true. She did not tell herself the other thing, which was that she did not know yet what she was going to do, and she could not look at Sam Calloway across a workbench while she did not know. She spent the evening reading everything she could find about New York City landmarks. Preservation Commission procedures, historical designation criteria, the legal mechanisms by which a building or block could be classified as architecturally or historically significant, and the timeline required for such a designation to become binding. The buildings on Sam's block were old enough. The architectural survey reports Marcus sent over at 9 p.m. confirmed that 3 of the structures on the block, including 91 Atlantic Avenue, dated to 1887 and had original facade elements of documented historical character. A preservation attorney she called at 9:30 confirmed that the structures met preliminary criteria for landmarks consideration, that an application could theoretically be filed, and that a landmarks designation, once granted, would permanently prevent demolition. Theoretically, she said. The attorney was careful about theoretically. She asked about timeline. The attorney said the landmarks designation process in New York City was not fast and was not certain and was under normal circumstances a matter of months or years. She asked about emergency interim protection orders. The attorney was quiet for a moment and then said that emergency interim protection was possible under specific circumstances, that it required compelling documentation and a sympathetic commissioner, and that it had been done before, though not commonly. She asked the attorney to begin preparing the documentation. The attorney asked if she was aware that this would potentially conflict with her firm's existing acquisition timeline. Evelyn said she was aware. She put the phone down and sat in her home office and looked at the architectural photographs in the survey report. The 1887 facade of 91 Atlantic Avenue, with its original corbelled brick and its cast iron storefront columns, and its hand-lettered window that said S. Callaway Woodworks. And she understood that she was looking at a problem she could not solve cleanly. There was no version of this that did not cost something. The question was only what she was willing to pay. She went to the workshop the following Thursday. It was the kind of January afternoon that had decided to be honest about winter 17 degrees and a wind that came off the harbor with directional conviction. She wore her old winter coat and the boots she now kept in her car, and she brought Maya, who had her hood up and her mittened hands in her pockets, and who went directly to her stool at the low workbench without taking her coat off because the workshop was still cold. Sam was at the main bench. He had a commission spread across it, a dining table in white oak that had been in progress for 3 weeks, and that Evelyn had watched develop from dimensioned lumber to something that was beginning to have the particular quiet authority of a piece that would outlast the people who owned it. He looked up when she came in. He smiled at her, the specific smile she had catalogued in the past month, as the one that arrived without his deciding to produce it, the one that existed before his professional composure could organize it, and she felt it in the specific interior location where she had stopped keeping a 10-foot gap between herself and things that could hurt her. "Cold out," he said. "Efficiently so," she said. She set her bag down and took off her coat and looked at his workbench and looked at him and understood that she was going to have to tell him. Not today, but soon. Before he found out through other means, which was the only thing she was certain she could not let happen. She had spent the past 3 days constructing the sentence in her mind, and it had not yet arrived at a form she found adequate. She sat at her folding table and opened her laptop, and for 2 hours she worked and he worked, and Maya moved between her stool and the small section of the workshop she had begun to treat as her territory, the eastern corner with the low shelf where she kept her current projects covered with her cloth. It was Leo who found it. This was the thing about disasters that Evelyn had learned in business. They do not wait for the moment you have chosen to manage them. They arrive on their own schedule with no consideration for your preparation. Leo came in from school at 3:15, dropped his backpack on his chair, and went to the storage shelf for his after-school snack, which was a bag of almonds he kept on the third shelf between the mineral spirits and the dowel rods, an arrangement that made Evelyn wince, but that appeared to involve no actual contamination risk. On his way to the shelf, he passed the standing cabinet beside the door where Evelyn had set her bag that morning. Her bag had shifted. The top flap had come open in the way that bag flaps come open when something inside them is slightly too large, and the magnetic closure does not fully engage. The acquisition summary was inside the bag. The acquisition summary with the appendix. The appendix with page 7. Leo was not trying to look at her things. He was reaching past the bag for his almonds, and the bag shifted further, and the document slid out partially, the first page visible with the Ethelgard capital letterhead and the title Meridian Project. Final Acquisition Summary. Clearly readable at the top. Leo did not pick it up. He looked at it with the instinctive curiosity of a child and then looked away and got his almonds. But Sam had been watching, not deliberately. His eyes moved around his workshop the way eyes move in a space you know thoroughly, tracking peripherally without deciding to. He had seen the document. He had seen the letterhead. He did not say anything. Evelyn was looking at her screen and did not know any of this had happened. At 4 o'clock, Sam said in a voice that had a quality she had not heard in it before, flat and careful in a way that was the opposite of his usual ease. "Can you hand me that blue binder on the cabinet shelf?" Evelyn looked up. The blue binder was on the shelf directly above her bag. She stood and reached for it, and in doing so, she saw that the acquisition summary had slipped partially out of her bag and that page 7 of the appendix was visible face up, the property addresses running in a column down the left margin. She saw 91 Atlantic Avenue. She saw Sam. He was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on his face before and did not want to see on it, and had known somewhere under her careful strategic thinking of the past 4 days was going to arrive. "What is that?" he said. She had not yet constructed an adequate sentence. She did not have one now. She had only the truth, which was large and jagged and was going to cost something no matter how she handled it. "Sam," she said. "What is that document?" he said again, quietly, without heat. The quiet was worse than heat. Leo looked between them with the alert stillness of a child who has learned to read the emotional weather of a room. "Leo, can you take Maya out to the yard for a few minutes?" Sam said. He did not raise his voice. He did not look away from Evelyn. Leo looked at his father. He picked up his almonds and said, "Come on, Maya." And Maya, who had also felt the weather shift, climbed off her stool and took Leo's offered hand, and they went out the back door together. Sam waited until the door closed. "Tell me," he said. She sat down. She put her hands flat on the folding table and looked at them, and then looked at him. "Ethelgard Capital has a development project," she said. "It was approved and in progress before October, before I came here. The project requires the acquisition of a block of properties on Atlantic Ave Avenue." She paused. "This block." The workshop held the sentence. Sam set down the tool he was holding. He set it down with great care, the way you set down something when your hands need to be empty. "Your company is demolishing my shop," he said. "The current acquisition timeline targets this block." "Yes. Q2 demolition." "Q2, he said. "That's April. April or May." He looked at her for a long moment. His face was doing something she could not read, which had never happened before. In the months she had spent in this room, she had learned the vocabulary of his expressions with the thoroughness she brought to everything important, and she could not read this one because it was several things at once, and they were not compatible with each other, and they were all true simultaneously. "How long have you known?" he said. 4 days. 4 days, miss, he repeated. "I found it in the acquisition summary on the 14th. I have spent 4 days trying to find a solution before I told you, because I did not want to tell you a problem without also telling you a path." "That is not your decision to make," he said. She absorbed this. "No," she said. "You are right. It is not." He turned away from her. He put both hands on his workbench and looked at the white oak table that was going to outlast its owners, and his back was to her, and she could see in the set of his shoulders the thing that was happening to him, the specific physical expression of a person absorbing an impact they had not seen coming. "I thought we were building a life," he said. He did not say it loudly. He said it to the workbench, or to the room, or to the particular version of the past 3 months that he had been assembling in good faith. "I thought you were here because you wanted to be here. And the whole time your company had a file on my building." "I did not know about the file when I came here," she said. "But you know now." "Yes. And you still came in today. You sat down at that table and worked for 2 hours. She did not answer this because there was no answer that was not also a wound. She had come today because she had not yet found the words. She had also come today because she had not wanted to lose even one more afternoon in this room, which was a selfish reason and one she owned without excusing it. "Sam." She stood up. "I am trying to stop it." He turned around. His face was resolved now into the one expression she had learned to read as the most honest one. He had. The one stripped of all social management, the one that was simply what was true. "How?" he said. "Landmarks preservation," she said. "The structures on this block qualify. I have an attorney working on an emergency application. If the Landmarks Preservation Commission grants interim protection, the demolition is blocked permanently." He looked at her. "And your company," he said. "Your board." She met his eyes. "My board does not know I am pursuing this," she said. "When they find out, there will be consequences." "What kind of consequences?" She chose not to soften it. He was not a person who needed things softened, and she had stopped managing information with him the way she managed it with people she did not trust. "I may lose my position," she said. "I may lose significant equity. The board has a fiduciary interest in the Meridian project, and they will view this as a direct conflict. They will not be wrong about that." He was very still. "You would do that," he said. "I do not know yet if the landmarks application will succeed," she said. "I want you to understand that I am not offering you a guarantee. I am offering you what I am doing, which is everything I know how to do." He looked at her for a long time. Outside in the yard, she could hear Leo and Maya Leo's voice rising in the particular register of a boy who has decided that the best way to manage an uncertain situation is to generate enthusiasm about something else entirely. She heard Maya laugh briefly, the small, cracked sound of it, and she saw Sam hear it too. "If you lose your position," he said, "if you lose the equity." "I will be financially stable," she said. "I am not going to pretend I would not feel the loss, but I have made worse decisions for worse reasons." She looked at him steadily. "I have never made a decision for a better one." The workshop was very quiet. Sam looked at the floor. He looked at the white oak table. He looked at the east window where the January light was flat and cold and honest. "I need you to go," he said. She had known this was possible. She had prepared for it. She found when it arrived that preparation and experience are not the same thing. "Okay," she said. She closed her laptop. She put it in her bag. She put on her coat. She picked up the acquisition summary and held it for a moment, and then set it back on the table because it was his information now, and she had no right to take it away. She walked to the back door and opened it. Maya was in the yard with Leo sitting on the platform of the playground set they had built on a December night that felt very far away. Maya looked up at her with the particular attention of a child who reads adult emotional weather with the accuracy that children develop when the adults around them have been unreliable. Evelyn looked at her daughter. "We are going home, sweetheart," she said. Her voice was steady. She was very practiced at steady. Maya climbed down from the platform. She crossed the yard. She stopped in front of Evelyn and looked up at her with those eyes that were Daniel's eyes, and then she put her small hand into Evelyn's hand and held it. She did not speak. She did not need to. Evelyn held her daughter's hand and walked through the workshop and out the front door onto Atlantic Avenue, where the January wind came off the harbor with its honest directional cold. And she did not look back at the hand-lettered window or the cast-iron columns or the light inside that she had learned over 3 months was the specific warm color of a life that mattered. She looked straight ahead. She had work to do. The board meeting was in 3 weeks. The landmarks application was in progress. There were approximately 19 different ways this could resolve, and she had mapped all of them in the past 4 days with the thoroughness she applied to everything that required her to function at the absolute limit of her ability. She had not mapped the possibility that it would hurt this much. She walked to her car with her daughter's hand in hers, and the cold coming through her coat, and the wooden heart in the inside pocket where she had put it in November and had not removed it since, and she thought about a man who had refused her blank check and handed her a broom and shown her without trying to what it looked like when someone built things that were meant to last. She was not finished. She was nowhere near finished. But for the length of Atlantic Avenue on a January afternoon, with her daughter's hand in hers and the cold doing what cold does, she let herself feel the full weight of what was at stake. All of it, the empire she had built, the position she might lose, the block of 1,887 buildings with their corbelled brick and their cast-iron columns, the workshop with the east window and the folding table and the flannel shirt on the hook by the back door, the man who had looked at her without management or performance and told her she kept surprising him. She held all of it. Then she reached her car, opened the door for Maya, settled her daughter in the back seat and got in the front. She called her attorney. "Where are we on the application?" she said. "We're close," the attorney said. "I need 3 more days." "You have 2, Evelyn said. She pulled away from the curb. The workshop diminished in her rear-view mirror, the hand-lettered window, the cast-iron columns, the amber light inside. She did not look away until she had to. The 2 weeks that followed were the longest of Evelyn Vance's professional life, and she had lived through the 2019 board coup in real time. She did not go to the workshop. She had made no promise to stay away, and Sam had asked her to leave, not to disappear permanently, but she understood the difference between the letter and the spirit of a thing, and she gave him the space because it was the right thing to do, and because doing the right thing was the only leverage she had left over her own behavior in moments when the wrong thing felt considerably more survivable. She worked. She worked the way she had always worked in a crisis, with total immersion and without sentiment, pulling every professional resource she possessed into a single focused effort. She slept 4 hours a night. She ate the meals her housekeeper left covered in the refrigerator because eating was logistically necessary, and she had made a private agreement with herself somewhere in the third week of November that she was going to stop treating her own maintenance as optional. She took Maya to Dr. Harrington on Tuesday and Thursday and sat in the waiting room and used the time to review Landmark's commission documentation on her phone. Maya had not regressed. This was the thing Evelyn had feared most in the drive home from Atlantic Avenue, that the disruption in the workshop routine would undo the months of careful accumulation. But Maya was not the child she had been in October. She was a different child now, not healed, never as simple as healed, but changed in the way that things change when they have been handled with consistency and patience, when the people around them have decided to be reliable. She still did not speak in sentences, but she spoke. She said school one morning with an inflection that communicated reluctance so precisely that Evelyn laughed out loud in the kitchen, the first full laugh she had produced in longer than she could calculate, and Maya had looked at her with something that was almost a smile. She was her mother's daughter. She kept moving. The Landmarks application was filed on a Thursday morning, 16 days after Evelyn had driven away from Atlantic Avenue with the cast iron columns diminishing in her rear-view mirror. Her attorney had been meticulous. The documentation ran to 240 pages and included architectural surveys, historical photographs sourced from the Brooklyn Historical Society archive dating the original construction to 1887. Comparative analysis of similar preserved structures in the 5 boroughs, and a legal argument for emergency interim protection that her attorney described as the strongest filing he had produced in 22 years of preservation law. Evelyn read every page. She submitted the application under her own name. She knew what this meant. She had known since January 14th when she had sat in her office with her coffee cooling and looked at page 7 of the appendix. She had simply needed the time to prepare her other documents, because Evelyn Vance had not spent 2 weeks only working on the Landmarks application. She had also spent 2 weeks on something else, something she had begun drafting in November in the peripheral awareness of a woman who has learned to think several moves ahead of the present moment when she first understood that the Meridian Project and the woodshop occupied the same map, and that this collision, if it came, was going to require a response commensurate with its scale. She had a file on her desktop titled Contingency. She had opened it every day for 2 weeks and refined it with the specific care she gave to documents that were going to matter. It was not a resignation letter. It was considerably more interesting than a resignation letter. The board meeting was called for the last Monday of January. Evelyn had requested it herself, which her board members had interpreted she knew as a sign that she was prepared to accelerate the Meridian Project timeline. They arrived in the 31st floor conference room with the particular self-satisfied energy of people who believe the situation has resolved in their favor. There were 7 of them. She knew all of them, the way you know people you have worked with for a decade, their pressure points and their vanities and the specific hierarchies of their self-interest. She had built this board carefully, choosing people who were competent and professionally aligned, and she was under no illusions about what competent and professionally aligned meant in the presence of an 18-month equity decline and a 43-acre development project with the potential to reverse it. It meant they were going to move against her. She had known this since January 14th as well. Marcus was at the far end of the table. He looked at her when she came in with an expression that was, by the standards of their 6-year professional relationship, openly worried. She gave him a fractional nod that she intended to communicate that she was in control of what was about to happen. Whether it succeeded, she could not be certain. She sat at the head of the table. She placed 2 documents in front of her. She folded her hands. "Thank you all for coming," she said. "I want to address the Meridian Project directly." Richard Hale, the board chair, leaned forward. He was 63 and had the specific confidence of a man who had never been genuinely surprised in a professional setting. "We appreciate that, Evelyn. The filing of a Landmarks application on the Atlantic Avenue properties is, as I think you understand, something the board views with significant concern." "I do understand that," she said. "The application, if granted, would permanently block demolition on a parcel essential to the Meridian Project's foundation phase. We have legal counsel reviewing whether a fiduciary conflict exists." "It exists," she said. The table absorbed this. "I am not going to argue that point," she continued. "I filed the application knowing it creates a conflict. I want to be transparent about that and about the reason." The reason? Richard said. The reason is that those buildings should not be demolished, she said. They are architecturally significant structures that are over 100 years old, and they house businesses and livelihoods that have operated continuously on that block for decades. The Meridian project, as currently designed, does not require those specific parcels. It requires their square footage. Those are not the same thing. Evelyn. This was Patricia Morse, head of the investment committee, a woman Evelyn respected, and whose opposition she had expected and prepared for. The project has been in development for 22 months. The acquisition timeline is not incidental to the design. It is the foundation of the return projections. I know, Evelyn said, because I approved those projections, and I am telling you now that I approved them before I understood what was on that block, and that if I had understood it, I would have designed the project differently. You would have designed a smaller project, Richard said. I would have designed a better one, she said. The distinction landed in the room without finding much purchase. Richard looked at her with the expression of a man who has been building towards something for several weeks and has now arrived at it. The board has met informally over the past 10 days, he said. We have concerns about whether your judgment on the Meridian project has been compromised by personal relationships developed in the area of the proposed development. She had expected this. She had worded it exactly this way in her own preparation. I have a personal relationship with a business owner on the affected block, she said. I am not going to deny that. I am also telling you that my judgment on this specific point is not compromised. It is clarified. There is a meaningful difference between those two things. The board does not see a meaningful difference, Richard said. At this time, we are prepared to move a vote of no confidence unless you withdraw the landmarks application and proceed with the Atlantic Avenue acquisition on the existing timeline. He placed a document on the table and slid it toward her. Evelyn looked at it. It was exactly what she had known it would be, a prepared resolution. Board signatures already collected, she noted, which meant the informal meeting had been rather more formal than Richard had characterized it. She looked at the document for a measured moment. Then she picked up her own first document and placed it on the table. Before anyone votes on anything, she said, I want to table this for review. Patricia reached for it first. She read the title. Her expression changed. It was a proposal, a comprehensive architectural and financial analysis of an alternative Meridian project design that preserved the Atlantic Avenue block while achieving 91% of the original projected returns through density reallocation on 3 parcels the existing plan had underutilized. Evelyn had built the financial model herself over 2 weeks of 4-hour nights. It was 112 pages, and it was the best work she had ever done because she had built it with the specific sharpness of someone who understood both the numbers and the ground they were standing on. This is an alternative project design, Patricia said. It is, Evelyn said. It preserves the heritage block and delivers returns within the board's acceptable range. I have had it independently reviewed by 2 outside financial analysts. Their assessments are in the appendix. The room was reading. She gave them time. Richard looked up first. This reduces the flagship tower footprint by 30% and redistributes that density to the Gowanus parcels, which current zoning changes make significantly more viable than they were when the project was originally scoped. Evelyn said, the project becomes more resilient, not less. We are not locked into a single anchor structure. The Q2 timeline is impossible under this redesign, Patricia said. The Q2 timeline is Q4 under the revised model, Evelyn said, which is 6 months later than the board wants, and which I recognize is a real cost. I am asking you to weigh that cost against what we would be destroying to avoid it. The room was quiet. Richard looked at her over the table with the expression of a man recalibrating a situation he had believed was already resolved. You came here prepared to lose your position, he said. It was not quite a question. I came here prepared for any outcome, she said. But yes, if the board votes no confidence and the alternative design is rejected and the Atlantic Avenue block is demolished on the existing timeline, I will have failed at the one thing I came here to do. She looked at him steadily. I did not build this firm to destroy things that should be preserved. If that is what this board requires of me, then we have a fundamental disagreement about what this company is for. The silence in the conference room had a specific quality. She had sat in many silences in this room. She knew the difference between the silence of people who have made up their minds and the silence of people who are genuinely reconsidering. This was the second kind. It was fragile, and she did not try to fill it. Patricia set down the alternative proposal and looked at Evelyn with an expression that was in the taxonomy of Patricia Morse's professional face, the closest thing to respect she typically displayed. "I want the financial analyst's appendix reviewed by our own team before any vote," Patricia said. Richard looked at her. "1 week," Patricia said. "We review the alternative model properly before we do anything else." Richard looked around the table. The vote he had expected to be straightforward had become something else, and he was a man who understood when the room had moved without him. 1 week, he said. She drove to Brooklyn that evening without deciding to. She found herself on Atlantic Avenue with the January dark full around the streetlights, and the cast-iron columns of 91 catching the light the way they always did, amber and warm, the hand-lettered window visible from half a block away. The workshop light was on inside. It was 7 o'clock. She sat in her car for 4 minutes. Then she got out. She pushed open the door with the bell above it on the spring. The smell arrived first cedar and linseed oil and warmth. The smell she had memorized without intending to, and that lived now in some foundational part of her nervous system alongside the sound of Maya's laugh and the weight of a small, rough wooden heart in her coat pocket. Sam was at his bench. He looked up. He did not smile immediately. He looked at her with the honest, unmanaged expression she had come to know as the most reliable version of him, the one that did not perform anything. "Board meeting was today," she said. "I know," he said. "You told me it was the last Monday of January." She had told him that in December. He had remembered it. She filed this away in the place where she kept the things about him that she could not resolve into data. "I brought them an alternative project design," she said, "one that preserves this block. The board wants a week to review the financials before they vote." He set down his tool. He turned fully toward her. "And if they vote against it," he said, "then I lose my position and the landmarks application goes forward without my company's cooperation," she said. "The interim protection order is currently under active review by the commission. My attorney believes the application has strong merit regardless of what the board decides. The buildings may be protected either way." "Maybe," he said. "Yes," she said. "Maybe. I am not going to tell you it is certain because it is not certain, and I made a decision a long time ago to stop managing information with you." He looked at her. "You built them an alternative model," he said. "In 2 weeks, nights mostly, while you were also managing the landmarks application." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment, looking at her with that particular quality of attention she had felt the first time on an October Tuesday, when she had been a woman in a sharp suit who had just had a blank check refused, and that had not diminished in 3 months, only deepened into something she had no adequate professional vocabulary for. "Evelyn," he said. "Yes. I owe you an apology." She had not expected this, and her composure registered the surprise before she could organize it. "You do not." "I said you hadn't changed," he said. "That night. I said you hadn't changed, and to your company my family was a rounding error." He looked at his hands. "That was not fair. I was angry, and I was scared, and I said something that was not true." "It was a reasonable conclusion from available evidence," she said. "It was not true," he said again firmly, the way he said things he had thought through carefully and decided. "You have been trying to fix this from the moment you found out. And I sent you away instead of letting you." She looked at him across the workshop floor. The amber light was the same as it always was. The east window was dark now, with the January night outside. The low workbench against the east wall where Maya spent her afternoons was clear and waiting, the small cloth folded neatly over whatever project Maya had left there last Thursday. "I should have told you the moment I found it," she said. "I told myself I was waiting to find a solution first. But part of it was that I was not ready to risk what we had built." She held his eyes. "That was not the right call, and I knew it while I was making it." He crossed the workshop floor. He stopped in front of her and looked at her for a moment, and then he did something she had not calculated or prepared for. He put his arms around her. Not a careful, managed gesture, but the simple physical expression of a person who has been holding something at a distance and has decided to stop and she let herself be held in the cedar-smelling warmth of his flannel and the January dark outside and the amber light inside, and she felt the specific sensation she had first identified in the third week of November and had been trying to find an adequate name for. It was the sensation of being in the right place. She allowed herself to feel it without condition. After a moment she said into his shoulder, the board might still vote against the alternative model. "I know," he said. "I might lose the firm." "I know," he said. "I want you to understand what that means in practical terms. I would still be financially stable, but I would be considerably less than a billionaire." She felt him laugh briefly, the low, warm sound of it. "Evelyn, I am not being self-deprecating. I am providing accurate information." "I know you are," he said. "That's not what I'm thinking about." "What are you thinking about?" He pulled back enough to look at her. "I'm thinking about a woman who walked into my shop in October with a blank check, and I told her a child's healing wasn't something she could acquire." He looked at her steadily. "Turns out she understood that better than I gave her credit for." She looked at him. "She just needed someone to show her what it looked like," she said. He held her face for a moment, both hands, the carpenter's hands that had built things meant to last, and he kissed her with the same quality he brought to everything unhurried present entirely without performance. Outside on Atlantic Avenue, the January night continued its honest business of being cold. The cast-iron columns held the lamplight the way they had held it for 138 years. Inside the workshop was warm. The board voted 9 days later. The independent financial review of Evelyn's alternative model had been conducted by the firm's 2 outside analysts and had returned a finding she had not been certain of. When she submitted it, the revised Meridian project was not merely comparable to the original in terms of risk-adjusted returns. In 2 of the 3 analyst models, it was marginally superior because the density reallocation to the Gowanus parcels had captured a zoning opportunity the original design had not been current enough to reflect. Patricia moved the adoption of the alternative design. It passed 5-2. Richard Hale was one of the 2. Evelyn remained CEO of Ethelgard Capital. The landmarks application was granted emergency interim protection status by the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission on the 14th of February, 3 weeks after filing. Her attorney called her at 7 in the morning, and she was already at her desk, and she received the news with the controlled composure she was professionally known for, said, "Thank you," and ended the call and sat for 30 seconds in complete stillness. Then she put on her coat and drove to Brooklyn. The workshop was not yet open. She knocked. Sam opened the door in his flannel with his coffee and sawdust already in his hair, and looked at her and read her face. "It went through Chicum," he said. "Emergency interim protection," she said. "The full designation hearing is in 4 months, but the buildings cannot be touched until a final determination is made. My attorney says the full designation is highly probable, given the quality of the application." He looked at her for a moment. Then he stepped back and held the door open. She walked in. The workshop was in its morning state. The windows cracked for the wood to breathe. Despite the February cold, the first coffee made the pieces in progress arranged on the benches in the specific order of a man who knows his own work. She stood in the middle of the floor and looked at all of it with the particular attention of someone who understands they are looking at something that very nearly did not exist anymore. "Leo is going to be insufferably smug about this," Sam said, coming to stand beside her. "Leo is 8, she said. "He is entitled. He has been telling everyone at school his dad's shop is getting landmarked." She looked at him. "You told him." "I told him there was a possibility," Sam said. He extrapolated. "He's going to be a very formidable adult," she said. "He's going to be exhausting," Sam said. But the way he said it was the way you say things about people you love unreservedly with the warmth that lives on the other side of exasperation. Spring came to Brooklyn in the incremental negotiated way of seasons that have to work their way through what winter left behind. By March, the ginkgo trees on Atlantic Avenue were beginning to show the first tentative green of new growth. By April, they had committed to it entirely. The Meridian project broke ground on the revised design in late March. Evelyn attended the ceremonial first shovel in a hard hat that did not coordinate with her coat and that she wore without apology. The flagship tower's redesigned foundation was 2 blocks south of Atlantic Avenue. The 1887 buildings, with their corbelled brick and cast-iron columns, remained exactly where they had always been. Holding the light, the way old buildings hold light with the particular steadiness of things that have survived long enough to understand their own value. The full landmarks designation was granted in May at a hearing Evelyn attended but did not need to speak at because the application had been built to stand on its own. Her attorney shook her hand afterward on the steps of the commission building and said it was the most elegant filing he had worked on in his career. She thanked him and drove directly to the workshop. Maya had returned to her stool at the low east-facing bench in February, the week after the interim protection was confirmed. She had walked in on a Thursday afternoon and taken off her coat and picked up where she had left off with the project under her cloth, which turned out to be a small wooden box with a sliding lid and an interior section divided by a carved partition, a design she had developed entirely on her own over 4 months of occasional work. Sam had looked at it when she revealed it and said in a tone of completely genuine assessment that the joinery on the lid was better than some adults he had taught. Maya had looked at him with the particular expression she was developing, part satisfaction, part the deliberate modesty of someone who has been told not to be arrogant and is testing the limits of that instruction, and she had said, "I know." 2 words, both earned. She was speaking in full sentences by April. Not constantly, not without selectivity, still with the economy of someone who had learned that words were worth choosing carefully. But sentences. Full, complete, occasionally surprising sentences that arrived in the middle of ordinary moments and made every adult in the room recalibrate what ordinary meant. She told Leo one afternoon that his drawing of a horse looked like a distressed ottoman, a sentence so precisely constructed that Sam had to leave the room for 2 minutes to manage his response to it. She asked Evelyn one evening while they were sitting together at the folding table that was now Evelyn's permanent fixture in the workshop whether people who were dead could see things. Evelyn had sat with this question for a moment with the honesty it deserved. "I don't know," she said. "I think the people we love stay with us in ways we don't always understand. I think your dad is in the things you make. I think he is in the way you paid attention to that house the first day we came here." Maya considered this. "He would have liked the shop," she said. "Yes," Evelyn said. "He would have loved it." Maya went back to her work. Evelyn sat at her table and looked at her laptop screen and did not type anything for a while. The thing about the woodshop's finances was that they were by any measure Evelyn applied to them a recoverable situation with significant untapped potential. She had begun looking at the books in November out of the reflex of someone who cannot be in proximity to unoptimized numbers without engaging with them, and what she had found was a craftsman of genuine skill with no coherent pricing strategy, an online presence that was functional but invisible, and a therapeutic toy line with documented clinical applications that had never been properly positioned in the market it was designed for. She had mentioned this to Sam in December. He had said, "I know," in the tone that meant it was a problem he had not yet solved and was aware of. She had said she could help with it if he wanted. He had said, "I know," in the slightly different tone that meant yes. By March, she was managing the woodshop's business strategy from her folding table, while Sam crafted at his bench and the children occupied their respective territories, and the workshop ran on its daily rhythms of coffee and cedar and the particular ambient music of a space where people were making things. She had rebuilt the pricing model, commissioned a professional photographer to document Sam's portfolio, redesigned the website with an emphasis on the therapeutic toy line's clinical applications, and established a direct partnership with 3 occupational therapy networks in the tri-state area. The online orders increased 40% in the first month. Sam had looked at the numbers and said nothing for a moment, and then said, "You did this in your spare time." "I do not have spare time," she said. "I reprioritized." He had looked at her with that expression, the one that arrived before his composure could organize it. "Thank you," he said. "You built my daughter a safe place to come back from grief," she said. "This is a very minor return on that investment." He had started to say something and then not said it, and she had gone back to her laptop, and the workshop had continued on its rhythms, and outside the April light had moved through the east window at its useful angle. The conversation happened on a Saturday in May. On the morning the full landmarks designation was confirmed when the workshop was closed for the weekend, and Sam had made coffee, and the children were in the yard on the playground structure that had been built on a December night that felt both very close and very long ago. Evelyn was at the workbench, not her folding table. The main bench where she had been learning over the past several weeks the basic vocabulary of joinery under Sam's instruction, because she had decided that if she was going to spend her time in a woodshop, she was going to understand the materials. She was working on a simple dovetail joint with the concentration of someone who is good at learning things and finds the early stages of not yet being good at something instructive rather than discouraging. Sam was beside her close enough to correct her angle when the chisel drifted, which it did regularly. "The designation is permanent," she said. She was not looking up from the joint. "Yes," he said, "which means this block is here for as long as anyone is paying attention to preservation law." "Seems like it." She made a cut. He adjusted her wrist fractionally without comment. She made the next cut better. "I have been thinking about the practical question," she said. "What practical question?" "Of arrangement," she said. "Logistics. The penthouse is 45 minutes from here without traffic and approximately 100 years from here in every other sense." She paused. "Maya's school has a location in Park Slope. I looked at it in February. It has strong outcomes data and a therapeutic support program." Another pause. "There are 2 residential units above this building. They have been vacant for 6 months. I know this because I looked at the property records." She was still not looking at him. She was looking at the dovetail joint. "Evelyn," he said. "I am presenting information," she said. "I am not asking for anything. I want to be very clear about that distinction because I have a history of presenting information in ways that can be interpreted as demands, and I am working on that." He was quiet for a moment. "The unit directly above," he said, "is bigger." She looked up. 3 bedrooms, he said. "Mrs. Guzman moved to her daughter's place in Florida in December. The landlord is a reasonable man. He would not be opposed to a tenant who had recently protected his entire block from demolition." She looked at him. "I'm not asking you to move in with me," he said. "I am noting that the unit is 3 bedrooms and that Maya would have access to the yard and that the school in Park Slope has strong outcomes data." He held her eyes with the particular direct honesty that had been from October to this moment the most reliable thing about him. "I am also noting that I would like you to be close, that I would like to figure out what this looks like when it is not provisional." "It has not felt provisional to me for some time," she said. "No," he said. "Me either." She looked at the dovetail joint she was learning to cut. She looked at the east window where the May light came through at its useful angle. She looked at the man beside her who had sawdust in his hair and patience built into his hands and who had refused a blank check in October and given her something that could not be acquired. The experience of being fully known by another person and fully accepted by them. Not the version of herself she had constructed for boardrooms and quarterly reviews, but the one underneath that, the one who hummed a lullaby in a crisis and wore borrowed flannel and had needed all along to be in a room where the work was real and the standards were honest and the people were worth staying for. "I will call the landlord Monday," she said. He nodded. Outside in the yard, Leo shouted something triumphant about the fort, and Maya's voice came back clear and decisive. "That is not how forts work." And Sam laughed, and Evelyn laughed, and the May morning moved through the east window of Callaway Woodworks, with the particular quality of light that comes after winter has finished arguing with spring, and the new season has finally completely won. She picked up her chisel. She made the next cut. It was not perfect. She could feel where the angle had drifted, where the edge had caught instead of gliding clean. She looked at it honestly without excusing it, and understood what needed correcting. She would do it again. She would do it until she got it right. She would do it the way she had learned over the course of 1 October to 1 May to do all the things that mattered, with patience, with presence, without the 10-foot gap. Sam was beside her. The children were in the yard, the buildings were designated and permanent. The empire she had traded was gone, and she did not miss it the way she had feared she would, because what she had traded it for could not be acquired. It could only be built. Slowly, honestly, in a specific quality of light, by hands, willing to stay in the room long enough to learn the materials. She had finally learned the materials. She made the next cut clean.